now for our peers that are not able to be here right now. All right, Tom, go ahead.
I appreciate that, Mark. That's good. Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. That you're recording it.
Yes. Okay, Tom, would you like to say hi? Tom Musgrave?
I'm Tom Musgrave, Communications Director for the Arts Council. I will be. I was really excited when Mark asked me to be a part of this presentation that's going to happen next month. Pretty much what I'll be doing is bringing a quasi replication of what I do for the Kentucky Crafted Artists when they jury in, and we have that annual orientation. So I'm looking forward to getting a chance to take a look at that material again and adapting it to this purpose. So I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Tom. Mimi, did you want to say anything before we get started with the presentations?
I appreciate that you guys have been so generous in kind of taking more time than I think you had to put this together. I really appreciate it. And I'm also very glad you're recording it because, as I had mentioned earlier, I don't see any reason why it can't be shared anywhere you want to share this in terms of, work that people are doing around the state. So thanks for helping out.
Okay, thank you.
And welcome everyone.
Yeah. And we agree that these are important topics and a lot of questions that are on people's minds, as artists and entrepreneurs all across Kentucky. But we also like it to be a specific opportunity for you to deal with, the special needs and concerns that are on your minds. And I know they'll be relatable to other artists as well, but it's a great chance for us to, work with you directly and kind of foster a relationship between our organizations. So
thanks.
Thank you. So I'll now turn it over to our first presenter, whose name is Tim Glotzbach. Tim is the retired director of Berea College Crafts, and we've worked with him for many years. He's kind of our go-to expert on the topics that we're looking at today, and one of our two top experts, actually, both of whom are on the call today. And he's an authority on arts marketing and design, and he's an artist himself, a jeweler. So we would like to express our appreciation for Tim for preparing and putting together a presentation today for Danville artists and Boyle County artists. We are looking forward to learning from you today, Tim. And if you think of any questions along the way as Tim's presenting, either write it down and ask it during our discussion time, or if you want to type it in the chat room, you're welcome to do that as well. And I'll keep an eye on the chat as we're going. Or give me a nudge if I'm doing anything that could make the presentation go better for you. I'm gonna, from my facilitator's chair here, I'm gonna go ahead and mute everybody so that we'll give the floor to Tim while he's talking. So Tim, give me a second. I'll mute everybody and then unmute you individually. And just rest assured though, even though you're muted, you'll have a chance to ask your questions when the time comes. So let's see. Okay, there's mute all. And let me find Tim and unmute. Okay, Tim, do you see? Here we go.
I can unmute me from this end.
Great. Okay.
And
Take
Mark,
it away, Tim Glotzbach.
What I will do in a little bit is I'll probably go to share screen and then just start a PowerPoint, I guess, is the way to do it. And then everybody will be able to see that and see the screen and won't have to look at me. That'll be good. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you. Good morning, Dan and Tom and Chris and all the artists from Danville. I'll do a quick, I guess, little introduction. I've spent my life in higher education. I'm gratefully retired now, so I get to do a lot of things, spend more time in the studio and play with grandkids and everything that you're supposed to do, I think, when you're retired. But as Mark said, I have always been a jeweler and a metalsmith, and haven't done what folks like Dan has done, who is an expert at it, which is market his work at shows around the country, very, very high quality shows. And I think probably something that all of you are looking to do as you develop your businesses, whether it's through the craft marketing program, which I highly recommend. If you are not a juried member at this point in time, that you seek out that information and you work with Chris and Tom and Mark and make sure that not only is the education good, but the opportunities and the exposure that that market will give you is something incredible. And I think it's probably been copied more than any other program around the country. So I'll say that when we get started today. I've spent my life with students, and up until my time at Berea College, that was definitely in the classroom all the time. One of the biggest things that we always had to start with, especially those students who said they were going to be majors in jewelry and metals, and I did all that teaching at Eastern Kentucky University. I ran the jewelry and metals program there, was develop a body of work. And so what I want to do today is talk a little bit about developing a body of work, how that builds in developing your brand, and then also go into pricing. And I have kind of condensed two 45-minute presentations into one. So I'm going to move a little fast sometimes, but you'll have the information. You can look at it on the screen and everything else. As I look at all of you on here and I look at many of your studios, I'm thinking, I see that some of you have developed already a body of work. And I think when we talk about a body of work and we talk about developing a brand, one of the things that I used to talk to my students about continually was really identifying and finding out who they were. Now, I related to that more from my sense when I got to graduate school. And when I was in graduate school, I saw so many unique and wonderful things happening from all the other graduate students that were around me. I wanted to do everything. You know, I did a little bit of this, a little bit of this. And I remember my first graduate meeting, and they said, Tim, at some point in time, you're going to have to focus. You will have to decide what it is you're going to do, and you're going to focus on that, and you're going to drive that idea until it no longer feeds you. And by that time, you will hop on to another idea. Well, that kind of made sense, and it did in many ways. And as I looked at my work, I found out that what I really was, the problem for me is that I felt like I was redoing things I had already seen. You study so much art history, you look at so many artists around you, to go to so many exhibitions, and you think, what is there new for me to do? And that's not a problem for someone to feel that way. I think many times we all get that way in our art. We don't necessarily hit a wall, but we hit a spot where the ice is a little thin and we start to feel ourselves fall, and we don't feel like we've got a firm footing. And as we look around, we find out that we can, and we regain our sense of composure, we gain our strength, and we move forward in another direction. So I guess the one thing I want to talk with you first about today is finding that focus, finding that purpose, understanding what it is. We're going to talk today about writing an artist statement, and something I'm going to challenge all of you to do if you want to look at artist statements is to go to websites. Now, you'll see a bio where an artist may be talking in the third person, but I want you to find those artist statements, those statements where someone's talking in the first person about this is who they are, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I look for, this is what I create. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. And I've been online a lot looking at the way coaches teach people to do certain things. And I've got a life coach that, you know, I've got a couple slides with her work on there, and she asks really three very simple, important questions, and we'll talk about those today too. And from there, once you've got all of that situated, you can talk a little bit more about pricing. And one of the things my students always struggled with was how they priced their work. And there are some very elaborate ways to price work, and there are some very simple ways to price work. And I'm going to talk about some of those simple ways because this is really the case that I believe. There is no perfect way. You will find your way, but there are many mistakes that can be made. And to be quite honest with you, and Dan, I'm going to use you as an example. As your work increases and as your stature in the art world increases, your prices will automatically increase. They should. In fact, every year you should reevaluate your prices, what you've done, where you've gone, and you need to focus on that because you want to lift that. That's your brand. And that's really what I want to start out today, is talking a little bit about that brand. So I'm going to share some slides with you if I can. If I can find, now Mark, you're going to have to help me again.
Okay, if you move your mouse cursor toward the bottom of the screen, a menu will pop up. You'll see share screen right in the middle in green.
Yep, I got that. Okay, there's my, and let me get my PowerPoint started here, which is now hidden behind everybody here.
So hopefully you'll still see a gallery, a not complete gallery of everybody on the right. So you see a few faces, and then we all see your screen now in the center. So we're seeing your PowerPoint open up.
Okay, and let me just hit the slideshow here, and we should start that. All right.
Good.
And so you can see the whole slide, correct?
Correct.
Everybody's okay. All right, very good. So, you know, one of the things about I think branding and marketing yourself is I thought this statement was always very good. You know, as I looked at things, you know, many times when I talk to my students, I talk with them from the standpoint of them being a business owner. And I am going to do that today. And I want you to put on your business owner hat today. And I want you to think a little bit about who you are as the business owner. You own a very successful art business at this point in time, and you need to think about it that way. So when you're building a brand, you don't want to think of yourself as a commodity. You know, as this slide says, you know, you want to build a brand so that you become something more than a price. You become something more than simply what it is. You want to make sure that your technical skill, you want to make sure that everything you do is important to that. You know, your brand is just your promise. You know, people will buy it even if the price isn't right because of the recognition. Now, what I mean by that is I have purchased pieces of artwork that made me stretch. I thought, boy, I don't know if I need to be spending this money right now, but the piece inspired me. I really wanted a piece of this person's work. I wanted to have it around me all the time. So your brand and what you are reflects the recognition of who you are, both from yourself and both from people outside of you. So as it says, your brand is derived from who you are, who you want to be, and who people perceive you to be. And sadly or gratefully, that perception is very important. You know, the most important brands, the most powerful brands are ones that people believe embrace their hearts. It gives them something and they'll stay loyal to it. Dan, I'm going to use Dan a lot today as an example because I really like the fact that he's there, because Dan has branded himself as a stained glass artist, a very successful person. If you look at Dan's work, people seek him out because of that work now. That's what you want to do. His collectors, people that have his work, stay loyal to them. I would bet that many of those people have more than one piece of his work. There are artists whose works I have multiples of because I enjoy what they do. They continue to grow, and they really continue to inspire me to look at things. So when you're developing a brand and when you're developing your body of work, I want you to think about this. You know, what is it that excites me? Is it a technique? If I'm a painter, is there a way of working? Is encaustic something that I want to explore? Is You know, is it not so much the technique that inspires me, but is it nature? Is it people? Is it the human form? Is it wildlife? What is it that really inspires me? What is it that makes me think I need to get my paint out? I'll give you a personal example. For me, in my jewelry, I love texture. I love the way a surface looks, and I love the way a surface feels. In fact, I want you to want to touch and rub the surfaces of the pieces of jewelry that are there. I want you to be able to look at them and delve deeper and deeper into that and read more and more information. Now, for me, that involves technique and a lot of other things. So in developing your body of work, I ask each of you to look at what you've done and say, well, as I look back at this body of work now that I have, whether you've been working for a week, 2 weeks, 2 months, 10 years, what is it that you see that is there an underlying theme? That's what my graduate committee said. Tim, you can't see it right away. They said, in fact, after graduate school, probably at the end of 3 years, you'll sit down, you'll say, you know, there is this theme that moves through things. I was so involved in it that I couldn't see it. And so many times as a student, as someone getting started, or even someone that's been in the art world for decades, you look at your work and say, what new themes are starting to show up? What new areas have I seen? I've been out, I've been exposed to other people. All of those are influences. All of those other people that I've looked at are influences. So what is it that I see out there? How do I develop this body of work? Now, why is a consistent, cohesive body of work important? Well, it doesn't mean that I love making things. So when we redid our kitchen, I did new lighting fixtures for the kitchen. Now they were metal, of course, but you know, it was part of that design process. So there are times when I will venture out. I love ceramics. I love carving soft woods, and those things have become part of my pieces, but they've all become necessary elements, and there is still that one theme. So it doesn't mean that if you're a painter, photography can't be a two-dimensional out for you that you enjoy. You may enjoy using those photographs as a means to carry the photos. It doesn't mean that if you're a ceramist that you can't also develop some understanding of jewelry, and maybe ceramics and metal start to become part of that. So you'll be led in a lot of different directions, but that body of work that you do, people, if you want them to see you as a painter, there should be some cohesiveness. You have to decide what that subject matter is, but if you are a painter and you paint one figure, should you always paint figures? Not necessarily, but it might be the figure that drives you and you deal with more significantly. I think it's important for you to determine some of that. It doesn't mean that you can't move into another area or something else. Same thing with photography, same thing with jewelry, same thing with any medium. But a body of work is consistent. It's all high quality. It's well prepared. It's well shown. And when we look at a body of work, we generally look at a lifetime of work, whether that lifetime as an artist is 1 year or 2 years, whether that lifetime as an artist is 40 or 50 years. It's a body of work that tends to move. Now, you know, it's easy to go back to art history now and look at early Picassos and look at late Picassos. And if you look at them, interestingly enough, you see some vestiges of things that have always been there. How a person uses a line, or how they apply paint to a canvas, or images that they do. So I don't want you to get too hung up in, well, exactly what is it? But it's the most important question that you can ask yourself right now. Who am I? What is it? The slide that's up in front of you right now is a pretty good question. The artist statement, explaining what can't be explained. Now, I think some of you when you're developing your brand will be helped by the fact that you need to write an artist statement. You know, you need to understand what that is. You need to understand how to go about it. You need to understand what makes a good artist statement. And I have read some wonderful ones, and I'm going to read 4 of them to you today and let you decide. But I invite you to go to websites and look for that artist statement and see what's there, and see if you can look at the work and have people understand what people do. Marketing strategies and artist statements are much the same, except for one big difference. A marketing strategy can be manipulative. We want to move somebody in a certain direction to buy something. And you might do that with, if you are a jeweler, or if you're a painter, or if you're a photographer, there may be some manipulation in how you move people's feelings. Now, I don't mean you're manipulating people, but let's face it, when we write, when we read a good novel, when we read something, our minds are being manipulated by the words. A word artist, a writer, a poet wants to move us. They want to manipulate our mind. They want to get at those deepest feelings. But an artist statement has one thing that's very important, and that's the sincerity or the authenticity of its authorship. That's why when you're developing a brand and you're looking at your work, you want to be honest with people. It may sound very simplistic for me to say that I'm inspired by texture, but if you look at the photographs I take, the close-ups of tree bark or the petals in a flower, you really see that I photograph textural objects. I'm drawn to them. Now, I understand that about myself, and I like that. I know that. So anytime I do a piece, I'm always looking for those elements. So what is it about an artist statement that's important? Well, you know, first, the artist statement, you know, it describes your passions, your inspirations, the ideas behind your work, the design elements, you know, and it's really a journey. You know, it takes a person and lets them know how you discovered your artistic side, how you created your vision. And it contains a selling statement. It describes the work, why it appeals to other people. You know, it kind of expresses a bond, or starts to create a bond between you and the customer, or you and the buyer. You know, we're going to talk today about selling work. We're going to talk about that. If you are an artist and you are developing a studio or a body of work, you surely probably want someone to own it and have it in their home. That's you as the business owner talking. You have to think about that. So what are some good ways, you know, that you can start with things? Well, you know, how about making a word list? A word list of words that describe who you are and what you do. Look at your body of work. If you see human figures, the word human figure ought to be in that word list. If you see, for me, texture ought to be there. If you see storytelling ought to be there. Write down a list of words that have meaning to you based on what you see in your work. There may also be words that you want to be associated with your work, and you need to put those down. Those are things you aspire to. And you always want a customer, anybody, to know what it is that you aspire to, you know, what it is you do. You know, artists have to tell a story. You know, artisans have to realize the importance and the value that's built in a relationship with a consumer. I think you just need to write honestly and write in a tone that your reader can understand. Now, I'll be honest with you. I've written artist statements and I read them and I thought, good Lord, what will someone think when they read this? This sounds so verbose. This sounds so academic. You know, what does it mean to somebody? I've also worried about when I say, I really like texture and I really like surface, that it sounds too simplistic, but it's honest. And as I write the rest of the statement, hopefully people understand that. So Don't use really grandiose or empty expressions. Don't be oversimplistic. Don't be overly technical. You know, there are a lot of jewelry techniques I can talk about, and I can make someone feel like they don't know anything. And you know what? The only reason they don't know the techniques is because they haven't done them. So you need to be careful about what you do. You know, I always used to tell my students to avoid self-doubt statements. Here's a self-doubt statement. I try to. I hope. I hope that I inspire you. No. I leave people with. You tell people you want to create, statements that don't show people things. They show people things, They don't just tell them. So a telling statement might be something like this. I'm inspired by human nature. Okay. But what does that mean? What part of human nature? Which part of it? Good parts, bad parts, actions, word, what is it? So here's a better statement. I'm inspired by a person's smile when they turn a handle and the toy moves. Now that means something, because when I read that, I see the smile on a face. I know what it means when you turn a handle, and it's the joy and the reaction that I'm after. That inspiration is something someone understands. I feel that inspiration. So when you're writing an artist statement and you're talking about what inspires you or what you do, make sure that they're positive statements. Make sure, as we said, that it's not, I hope to, I try to. Tell a person what it is. I am inspired. Not I hope to be inspired, or sometimes I'm inspired. I am inspired. So make sure of those things that are good. Use picture words. So a first paragraph of an artist statement really should explain the motivation behind your process. I'm inspired by a smile on a face when a person turns a handle and the toy moves. A simple statement of why you do the work you do. The human figure has always enchanted me with the softness of the curves and the subtleness of the texture of the skin. The shadows that fall across the human figure in the sunlight cause me to feel, those types of things. What you do after that then, as you begin with that statement, is you support the statement. You show them more about your goal. Now you talk a little bit more about that figure, that is. The second paragraph, and this is a simple artist statement. This process is a 3-paragraph artist statement. Now, your artist statement might be 1 paragraph. It might be 7 paragraphs. In fact, generally, you probably want to keep your artist statement to no more than a page. And that's a long one. You will probably find that a shorter one works best for you most of the time. Show the reader how you make decisions. How and why do you select the materials and the techniques and the themes? But you want to keep it simple, and you want to tell the truth. You want people to understand you. Understanding your brand, looking at your work, knowing who you are, knowing what excites you, knowing what motivates you, being honest about it, writing it down, feeling uncomfortable about what you've written, showing it to a friend, having them kind of laugh, showing it to another friend who knows nothing about art and having them say, I have no idea what you're talking about. All of those things are important, and they're all okay. In fact, it's something you have to do. Your third paragraph, show the reader a little bit more about you and your current work. Now you can talk about it. You can talk about life experiences. If I talk about my work, I will talk about being 4 years old and remember sitting with my grandmother who was a good German lady who used to take pillowcases and with a pencil draw chickens and little houses and cows on them. And then she would take thread and she would embroider around the edges of these things. And I would have my piece of paper there and I have no idea what I was drawing, but I remember looking at her chickens And I can still remember vividly those chickens. And I remember my uncle, who was a bricklayer, and my dad, who used to repair everything growing up on the farm. We didn't buy a new one, we fixed it. All of those things were creative. All of those things were constructive parts of who I was. And that all became part of my statement. You know, it was prior life experiences. And then you want to talk about what you're exploring. You know, what do you explore? Technique? Yes. If you're studying a technique, talk a little bit about it, but you may not be able to go into such depth. But again, don't be so verbose and don't be so technical that people can't understand it. But give them, for somebody like me, I'd be interested in knowing about those techniques. I'll probably go online and find out a little bit about it. Some people will, some people won't, but give people enough that they can do those things, you know. And the final thing I want to say to you, you know, don't hesitate to get some coaching on it. Ask somebody. The Arts Council is very good for this. The Arts Council is very good. In fact, if you jury into the craft marketing program, you know, people are going to look at the artist statements, and the Arts Council is going to talk with you about it, and they're going to require you to have some information. And if you sell in a gallery, that gallery, or if you sell your work with a pamphlet or a brochure or any kind of mailer, those things are important. And everybody who's going to have a successful business now needs social media, and they need a website. And that artist statement needs to be a part of that. Your bio needs to be there. In fact, if people can have said things good about you, you need to read those things. You need to put them there. Those are customer testimonials that are so very important. You know, as an artist, you need to be really prepared for a buying population that is pretty savvy right now. That's the population you want, the very savvy population who's looking at art, looking at other things, not just your work. In fact, everybody's seen tons of work, including yours. The internet right now offers instant comparisons to things. If you're on Etsy, you're there with how many other thousand people? If you're in the craft marketing program, there are wonderful artists from Kentucky and a couple surrounding states that are there. All of you are vying for the interest of that consumer. What is it that you bring? You need to feel confident about it. You know, who you are, what you do, and your place in the marketplace. You know, what is your place in the marketplace? I used to talk a lot to my beginning students and my advanced students in jewelry about that. You know, their place in the marketplace starting out was very different than it would be 10 years down the road. Many of the students that I had, in fact, all of the students that I had, did not want to go into higher education. They wanted to go into business for themselves. And so very early on in my teaching career, I had to readjust and retrain myself in a lot of different ways. I had an art school background. I was design, I was all of those elements that come with just a very good and solid art training, but not the business skills, not the marketing skills, not understanding of pricing, not understanding anything about customers or working with customers or dealing with clients or dealing with commission work. So those were all things early on that I had to develop so that I could go back and work with my students on, and then get them around people who are actively doing it day in and day out. And I'm always happy and honored that so many of them, you know, still are operating very, very successful studios and doing very well. And just to have had that little part in their life is something I will relish forever. So it's very important. At a point in time, they understood who they were. They had good technical background. They started to understand how important it was, that artist statement, and then also, you know, what they did. I'm going to read you an artist statement right now, and I just want you to listen to it based on what I just said. If I can find it here. I aspire to create simple, elegant woven vessels that possess a richness of spirit and a presence embodying the soul of the tree from which they came. A fascination with old tribal textiles, finely woven functional containers, and ancient processes fuels my inclination to manipulate fiber. Employing various weaving techniques to inject texture and rhythmic design elements, I draw significantly upon the inspiration of early Native American and contemporary Japanese basketry. As my work evolves, I am compelled to create more intricate, textile-like woven forms, finding great satisfaction in emulating the art and integrity of fine basketry. I'm interested in the magical beauty seen in everyday life. In my paintings and drawings, I like to alternate working from observation with working in a more intuitive manner. The imagery is inspired by real-life observances and experiences. My recent work centers around the landscape near my home in central Kentucky. The changing light, color, water, and vegetation offer seemingly endless opportunities for me to explore aspects of color, light, and surface relationships that I find both challenging and beautiful. Those are two pretty nice artist statements, I believe. Two different people, a basket maker and a painter, both of them talking about what they are. Now, you don't have the opportunity right now to look at the work and read the artist statements. But the artist statements by themselves, even without the work, tells you a lot about the individual, and it tells you a lot about what's there. Both of them were about 3 paragraphs long, and both of them really let you know about the heart and the soul of that individual. So I want you to think about that a little bit. And, you know, Mark, if it's okay, I'm just going to kind of move into a little bit of pricing now, and we come back later for some questions and everything. You know, I talk about pricing with people a lot. And, you know, as we talked with Mimi the other day and some things that you all might want to know about, we talked a little bit about pricing. And I'm going to move a little bit quickly through this because I think it's very important. But one of the things that I want to talk with you about in terms of pricing is, I think, some of the problems that people have. Many times with my students, as they were looking at things, I had to talk with them about 3 things in the beginning. I think, you know, that there's kind of a psychology of pricing. You know, work seen within the context of something, context, perception, and priorities. Now, I'm talking about those things with regard to your artwork and the person that's looking at it. You know, I put this quote up here by Immanuel Kant, and it's kind of an academic quote, but it's one I've always liked about beauty. You know, is beauty something that's measurable, or is it just an opinion? Or is it a little bit of each, colored by the immediate state of mind of the observer? So think about what he's saying there. 2 of us are looking at something, and one of us says, wow, this is beautiful. I really like that. And the person standing next to you says, I'm not feeling it. Now, we don't know exactly what both of those comments mean, because somebody says they like it, somebody says they're not feeling it. Well, I don't know on either way. But there was something there clearly that struck. So is it the context, the perception, or the priorities? It could be the priorities. One person might have said, I want to have things in my home that look like this, that inspired me, the beauty that's here. The other person maybe doesn't have that same priority. You know, so that thing of perception, where someone is, the context that it's in, sometimes is really important, and it's something you need to think about. And I think it's sometimes when people are pricing, I talk about it because of this. I used to have students that would produce work, and then they would take it someplace, and they said, I sold everything I made this weekend. I said, really? You sold all of it? I said, yeah. And I said, where did you sell it? And they said, well, my aunts bought it. Okay, well, that's good, you know, but your aunts kind of love you, you know, and your aunts are probably going to buy it anyway because they want to support you and everything else. So again, selling work in a certain context means something. Yes, you sold the work, but what does it mean on a grander scale? So understand that as you're looking at pricing and as you're looking at where to sell your work, you might have to make some decisions along the way about what's happening. Psychology of pricing, though, and we talk about that. Why do you want to have effective pricing? Well, it gives you credibility as an authority. In other words, if we talk about something, we talk about branding now. Branding gives you credibility as an authority. As people look at your work and they read your artist statement, and they look at your work and they read the artist statement and they read your bio, they start to understand that you know what you're talking about. You can actively describe what it is you're doing. You know where your place is in the art world. You know where your place is technically. You're starting to establish yourself as an expert. Now, testimonials from other people along the way with that is simply going to develop immediate trust in a customer. If I can read about it, if someone said about you, if you've been in an exhibition, again, the psychology of pricing little bit goes back to branding. Who are you associating with? The craft marketing program is an excellent start. Danville Art Association, the art program there, excellent start because it's a community of artists. It's a community of people who have like-minded ideas and ideals. They're working along the way. I'm going to say this in a way that I hope everybody understands. You and your work may not be suitable for every market that you put it in. Sometimes I find people with very beautiful work, they're in a marketplace where the work is still very beautiful, but the audience, the customer base, is probably not looking for that price range, nor may they understand some of the things that you're trying to say. You want to elevate the places you show your work as quickly and often as you can. But you need to understand what those are. People have to have a confidence in the product or the service that you have. How do you develop the confidence? Well, you develop yourself as an artist. You're seen, you do workshops, you're at the Danville Art Center, you're part of the craft marketing program, you're juried into the Kentucky Guild, your work shows up in places. People can read and they can see that you are not sitting alone in a little cubicle someplace where no one knows who you are. You're active, you're out there, you're going to workshops. If a summit is held by the Arts Council, you show up there to learn more. There's always something to learn. There's always something to learn. And people see you and you become part of a larger art community. That builds your brand. People need to know who you are. They need to know where you are. Confidence in the salesperson, that's you. How you talk about your work, the kind of conversation that you have. We as artists, sometimes I can hide in my little room downstairs in the basement in my studio and I can work and nobody knows I'm there and I'm as happy as a lark. But I need to be able to look someone in the eye and talk to them about who I am. And that gives that person confidence. You have to get somebody excited. You have to build the value of who you are in your mind. You have to build the story. Higher prices will affect a better quality client. But what you really be looking at is what value, what clients will value about your work. What will they look at? What will they do? How will they look at the things that you do? In fact, I think that you owe your clients the best you. You want to attract higher prices, then you're going to have to attract a better client. How do you attract a better client? Well, you build your brand. You're seen, you're respected. People talk about you. You work on your technique. You work on your presentation. You do everything you have to do. That's investing in your client. Your clients get better results. They're more invested because you offer better support. What is that support? The support that you offer your clients as an artist is that you keep growing, that you keep being seen, that you raise the value of yourself and your artwork. Dan Barnes is a good example of that. Dan's work is absolutely beautiful. And to his clients and to those people that repeatedly come back to him, they understand that. They understand that one piece is great, two pieces are great. I can talk to someone. I want Dan to succeed because I see great value in that, and I want to value that artwork even more. As a collector, you know, it's an investment and it's something that they love. So when you're looking at effective pricing and everything, you have to look and operate like a CEO or an owner, and you also have to operate as the employee and the laborer. You know, you're the CEO of the business. You have to take advice carefully and judge it against the factors of your work. Now, I say taking advice carefully because I'm offering you advice today. Be careful with that advice. It has to fit you. Not just because Tim said it. You have to work on it, but it has to fit you. There's no one pricing method that's going to work for everybody or every business. But there are a lot of mistakes that you make as an artist that I think that if you're running a business, and there are those of you who are maybe full-time employed and art is a wonderful part of your life. It's that second life that you have, but you love what you do. I was an educator. I continued to do my work and I sold it to clients on commission, but I love teaching. I wasn't going to stop teaching. And you might be in the medical profession, you might be in a law profession, you might own another business, and that's okay. Develop both of those lives. But the problems that we make as artists is we don't monitor the worth or what we do. You know, so what do you make? Where do you market? Who's the competition? What are the competing prices? To effectively price your work, you have to know those things. You have to know what you make, where you market, who you're competing with. I always want to compete with people who have exceptional work. I don't care if it costs more, but the work has to be exceptional work. I want to do that. So I want to be in markets where the people that understand that I can associate with, I can work with. You may not be there starting out. You may not be to show, you know, in the same markets as someone who is a painter or a photographer who's already established that brand and your reputation. It's okay that you can't be there all the time, but that's what you want to strive for. Okay, and you look honestly at your work and you go through that. You know, what is your work? What is your work worth? Well, do research into target markets. I look at marketing this way, and I know this kind of flies in the face of who we are as artists sometimes. Who are the people I'm competing with? Who are the photographers, the painters, the woodworkers, the jewelers, the ceramists, the sculptors? Who are those people around me that I'm working with? Do your research into markets. Find products that are similar. I will guarantee you that somebody knows it's too easy right now. Now, I'll use me as an example and take it for what it's worth. But if I see your work, I probably have seen somebody's work who looks like yours. I'll guarantee you that I can find people whose work looks like mine, because I know who some of them are. I love their work, not because it looks like mine, but I'm inspired by other people as well. Don't think the people in the marketplace don't too. They know who your competition is, and they're going to look at who's technically most proficient, who inspires them the most, whose work is the greatest asset to their collection, you know? And so, you know, you have to know what those markets are, and you have to know what you are. Here are 3 hard truths, or 4 hard truths that I used to tell my students. Just because you love your work, it doesn't mean that you could put a high price on it. Just because you love your work. Your work is both unique and similar. Hey, somebody out there is doing that work. I'm sorry. And it's really close, or it's exactly like yours. And art buyers do compare your work, and they compare your prices. Remember, we went back to that slide on context and priorities. I may place a priority on it. You may have an art buyer that says, you know, knows in their mind that they've got $2,000 they could spend on something. Your painting is $2,500. Now, I'm sorry to bring it down to price, but if I've got $2,000 that I'm willing to spend to add something to my collection, well, you don't have to sell me on your $2,500 painting. You only have to sell me on $500. I'm already committed to $2,000. So what's going to get that other $500 from me? Your brand, your technique, your artist statement, your ability to talk to me. What I find about you that makes me say, I have to spend the extra $500. I want this piece. I'm sorry that there's money and art together, but it exists in both of those things. So here are some things real quickly that I want you to take into mind as you're developing an art business. You have to know how much time you spend on something, what the materials are, the cost of them, what your overhead is, and what kind of profit you want to make. Most artists don't like to track these things. I'm going to tell you, if you're going to call yourself a business, and if you're filing taxes, with the federal government, you had better have these records. You don't want to get audited. You don't want to be, you want to be able to do this. Account for everything, cost of goods sold. What do you need to take home from your business? Well, I'm gainfully employed right now, but I need to break even, and I'd like to make at least $1,000 a month from my work. So, okay, so I've got $1,000 a month. Making $1,000 a month does not mean that you paid yourself $1,000 a month, that's the amount of time that you have. We'll talk about the difference between labor and profit. Calculate all of your overhead. Look at your shop supplies, your utilities, repair, everything. Keep track of everything. Get yourself a journal. Know what it is. What's your shipping cost? If you have framing costs, what are all those things? Many of you may already do this, but many of you may not. And I'm encouraging you to keep track of everything that you do. Most people don't take into account their design time, their marketing, their sales, their research, their maintenance, their advertising, their insurance, their mortgage, their rental payments, their packing. You can assume some tax savings if you have a studio in your home, but be very careful about how you do that. Your shipping costs, your show travel, your expenses, your lodging, all of those things are costs that could be associated with your business. So here's a simple pricing thing that I used to give my students. It's very simple. Cost of materials plus the cost of supplies, cost of expenses, determined hourly rate plus the fees equals the price. So let's look at a piece of jewelry. 5 hours at $15 an hour. I used to tell my students when they were undergraduates, they were developing skills. I would let them go down to 10, but I said $10 to $15 an hour is what you're worth right now. You have skills that other people don't have. All of you need to think of yourself that way. I have skills as a painter, a photographer, a sculptor, a ceramist that other people don't have. Now I'm talking from a jeweler's perspective, and they were competing with other jewelers. Plus 2 times the material. If each piece, if there was $5.75 worth of materials in that, we used to take 2 times that. And then times 1.1. What's the 1.1? Well, that's your profit margin that's being built into that. So we had $75 in labor plus $11.50 in materials equaled $86.50 times 1.1. My wholesale price was $95.15. Wholesale price is half of retail in the art world generally. So my retail price was $190.30. Where's my profit? That 1.1 is profit. The labor is not profit. The labor is your time. You deserve to be paid for your time. If you've got everything accounted for in your materials and your cost, everything is done. Now, that formula is great, but it doesn't work well for painters. So here's a simple one that, you know, I've talked with painters, I've talked with 2D people, and this is one that kind of works. They use a per square inch or a per linear inch price. So it kind of looks like this. If it's a square inch price, if it's a 24 inch by 24 inch canvas, they have identified $3 as the per square inch price. Now, where'd that number come from? I've asked people and they said, well, when I started out, I didn't figure I could get much more than $3 a square inch. You know, now I charge $6 a square inch, but they sell more paintings and everything else. It is rather arbitrary, but if you go online and do a lot of research, you know, there are things that seem to be, you know, there seems to be some commonality among them. So that's $1,700. So what's this linear pricing thing? Well, sometimes people use linear pricing because all of their artwork is the same size. It's all 24 by 24. It's all 8 by 8 or whatever. But look at the difference. You know, 24 inch is equals 48 inches times $15, you know, a linear inch equals $720. My wife does custom window treatments and bedding. You know, in that industry, when you build a cornice board and then you cover it and you do this, that linear price is something that many of them use. So I understand that pricing, and that $15 per linear inch covers all of her costs and everything else. And she can simply measure something and say, all right, that's a good price on it. Now, if there are other things that she had to do, if there was more design time or anything else, some things may change it, but it really gives you an understanding about where you are. There is no hard and fast rule. These are two rules that people tend to use. Now, I want to show you the bottom example for one big reason. An 8 inch by 8 inch times $3, it's $192. But look how the price changes the other way. It's a little bit more in line with each other. On smaller works, and some of you may do smaller works, and you think, my goodness, you know, once I multiply this, it doesn't work out right. You have to find, I offer these two simply because they're two very simple, unique ways that two-dimensional artists can look at their works. I recommend that you ask other artists. I recommend that you ask painters. How do you go about pricing that work? Do you use a linear inch and I've asked people, and like it or not, or unusual or not, those are the things that they look at, those two prices. Here's something that I recommend that you do. Revisit your pricing structures every year. Don't just willy-nilly change your prices, but they could be wrong. Hey, if your price is too low, raise it. If your price is too high, lower it. But do not do it continually. And please do it with respect to your work and some research. Talk with your customers. If someone looks like they would like to buy a piece, but they seem to be stuck, it's okay to ask a question. What were you wanting to pay for a piece? That's a logical answer. You'll get a dollar figure. You know, for most people at a show looking at work, many times, unless they're a collector, they're thinking about price, trial and error. You know, sometimes your prices work, sometimes you don't. Do not continually discount your prices, but know when it's appropriate. Know when it's appropriate to lower your prices. My opinion is, if you're a practicing artist, whether you have another full-time career or not, whether you're a practicing artist, you're continuing to work, every year your prices should go up a little bit. Every year your prices should go up a little bit. How much will be based on who you are and what you do. Grow your reputation and style, and your prices will automatically go up. Create integrity by keeping your prices consistent. They're not this at one show and this at a different show. And especially if you have work in a gallery and someone comes to your studio and they see your work and they say, if I buy it directly from you, what can I get it from? It's the same price that gallery charges. Do not undercut your gallery. Do not undercut the Artisan Center at Berea. Do not undercut any other gallery that has your work. Do not undercut any gallery in Danville. If you put your work there at that, then you sell it to someone out of your studio at that. That's integrity, and it has to be there. Quality presentation matters. I don't care what the price of your work is. If it's not well made and well displayed, it doesn't and shouldn't command that price. And your street cred matters just as much. Do people know who you are on the street? Do they know what you do? Do they know how you work? Get out there. If you can teach, do workshops. Let people know who you are. Do an online workshop. I've seen a lot of online workshops spring up as fundraisers and everything else now. Your street cred matters. Be seen, be noticed. Let people know who you are. Talk with people. Teach lessons if you want. And I hope all of that helped a little bit. So Mark, I'm going to turn it back over to you, or any questions or anything. I know I've probably run over about 8-10 minutes.
That's wonderful, Tim. Thank you. And I noticed a few comments and questions coming up in the chat as you were talking. I invite everybody to, I know Tim gave you a lot to think about and connect with. So I want you to continue thinking about that. If you have a question for Tim, please write it down or just type it in the chat and we'll get to your question when our next presenters finish talking. And I'd like to move straight in now to our next artist, Dan Neal Barnes, who's a multimedia artist and has helped the Arts Council and our many communities across Kentucky with these topics. And we're going to go now more in depth with the subject of presentation, as Tim touched on. And Dan, I'm going to run your visuals for you. So y'all bear with us as we proceed through that.
At the end.
What's that, Dan?
The visuals will come at the end.
At the end. Okay, I'll be ready.
Okay. So first off, hello to everyone. I will tell you that what Tim said about his artist statements is all true. And I think it even carries over into your booth. When I'm talking to people in my booth, I talk to them from a place of passion and excitement. And it's part of the selling process, I think. I've never thought I was an excellent, great artist, but I think the fact that I can communicate with them and bring them home, so to speak, I connect to them on a level that makes them want to have a piece of my work in their home. And I said, I think that's a big part of my success. Also, I want to give you my phone number for anyone that has questions later that they think of later. You're more than welcome. My phone number is 859-559-3171. So feel free. When I started doing this, I had a lot of people help me, and I enjoy passing that on. Tell a little about my background. I grew up in Western Kentucky in Henderson. My family built homes. They were building 30 houses a year. I walked away from that and went to college, graduated from the University of Kentucky with a degree in human environmental design, where I studied art, architecture, and design. I then, believe it or not, started an upholstery business and built custom designed furniture in Lexington and the surrounding area for the interior design community for many years. After many years of doing that, to be quite honest, I became bored. Took a stained glass class locally in Lexington, Kentucky. 2 years later, the lady that taught me worked for me, and I never looked back. I just began to push the envelope of what I was doing and trying to create my own path. My work is quite diverse now. It's actually classify myself as a mixed media artist. I have fused glass, stained glass sculptures that are three-dimensional. Some are very quite large, some as many as 10 feet tall and 5 feet wide. A lot of my fused pieces are in banks, convention centers, universities, hospitals around the country now on a very large scale. That incorporates fused glass, stained glass, copper, aluminum, wood. It just keeps growing and keep pushing forward. The next thing that I did after getting the stained glass under my belt was I started applying to organizations, which Tim mentioned earlier, the Kentucky Guild, the Kentucky Craft Marketing. All of these things created the connections. Like, for instance, the Kentucky Crafted, my very first show in Kentucky Crafted in Louisville, I won 2 awards. It instantly started that progression of growing for me. It was like taking a stepping stone, one step at a time, from one to another. All the things that compile themselves to get you where you're going. Arturo Sandoval was one of my professors at the University of Kentucky when I was in college. He got me my first gallery opening. The Kentucky Guild. 1 month after I was accepted into the Guild, I had work at the brand new Artisan Center in Berea. It was one of the most exciting days for me, especially just getting started. A month after joining the Guild, I have my work in the Kentucky Artisan Center in Berea. Things that have happened through the Kentucky Craft Marketing Program. Like, for instance, my very first large installation, which is in the Owensboro Convention Center. It's 60 feet up, it hangs 45 feet down. Came from a recommendation from the Kentucky Arts Council and being part of the Kentucky Craft Market. It just pushed my credibility and pushed my my artwork into another realm. And I've continued to get large installations after that. So those organizations are key to someone just getting started, I think. And that's part of why I give back, is because I've received so much from them. I enjoy passing that on. Started doing shows. My intent when I first started was, I thought, well, I'll just do some indoor shows and not do outside shows, because that was going to be too much hassle and weather. Started doing some indoor shows and discovered that they were great, but there just wasn't enough of them. So I started doing outdoor shows as well. And I now travel around the country doing shows from Baltimore to Atlanta to Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Chicago, all the way to Miami. It's a lot of hard work, but I love what I do, and connecting to the people and selling my work is I don't know how to explain it. It's something within me that I love to do. I want to talk about tents right off the bat, because that's going to lead into the interior design, booth designs that I want to talk about. Most of the shows you do outside, you obviously have to have a tent. There's 2 or 3 kinds. Trimline is one that I use. It's a steel tent that has a canopy over it. There's a Show Off is another brand. Those are predominantly aluminum. They're lighter weight. And then, of course, there's Easy Ups. I would not recommend Easy Ups for several reasons. They go up really easy and they're quick, but they also will leave the ground and fly away very quick. I've literally witnessed that take place. I was at a show in Indianapolis, and I Easy Up during a storm, flew 2 booths over, left and went 2 aisles over and crossed 2 booths and landed on top of another guy's tent, destroying his tent and actually sending him to the hospital. So think about that. You may be responsible for what you do with an Easy Up. But that being said, that can happen to any tent. So it's appropriate to weight your tent and do all the things that you need to do with that. We'll talk a little more about that later. So I'm going to start with a little bit about booth design now. Booth design is the physical structure and any materials or equipment that you use to display your work or product. This includes the floor plan and how you use it. This is the environment in which you sell your product. So it's very important. I go out of my way to do everything I can in my booth space, because the reality is you and I are in competition. I'm just going to say it. I'm out there to sell my work. and I'm going to do everything I can to get them to come in my booth and not yours. So it is a competition. So I do everything I can, from lighting to displaying my work in an appropriate manner. So all the little things that we're going to talk about today, they all fit together to create the whole. Merchandising is the use of components that you display your work, the mood and ambiance that you use to draw people into the space. I will tell you a little statistic. When you're at a show and there's 200 people, 200 different artists sitting there, people are walking by your booth, you have anywhere from 3 to 5, maybe 7 seconds to get their attention. They're on to the next booth past that. So you have to grab them right from the get-go and draw them into your booth. Also, you're probably 4 times more likely to sell something to someone if you can put it in their hand. Something that I do frequently. I'll literally take wall pieces off the wall and hand it to them. Vessels and things that I've made, I'll literally pick it up and hand it to the public and let them touch it and feel it. It's part of it. Obviously you're going to use tables for displays. There's all sorts of different ways to display your work. If you're a wall artist, meaning if you have paintings, you're obviously going to hang them on the wall. If you do sculptures and things like that, you're going to need pedestals. But there's things you need to consider when you're doing that. Don't just use card tables and chairs and things that set out in the space. If you're going to use a card table, it needs to be skirted to the floor. And another thing, don't set your artwork on the ground. I've gone to shows and people have their artwork sitting on the ground. It's like, that's what I do when I'm at a yard sale. You have to respect your work and want it to be of value. So displaying it in a proper manner is the way to get someone to let go of that money. As doing a commercial design or do-it-yourself design, meaning the booth space, there are commercial booth spaces that you can purchase. There's a company called Pro Panels. They make a lightweight panel that hangs in your booth, or you set it up in your booth that you can hang artwork on. The problem with those is that it's very generic. A lot of shows you go to, there's going to be many artists that will have the exact same display. So you got to keep that in mind. When I first started, I designed my own booth. I spent a lot of time developing it. You can be creative when you do that and make it fit your work. One of the main things I learned was, and it came from other people telling me that I needed to go to the American Craft Council show in Baltimore, and they said you need to apply to that show in Baltimore. And I didn't even have a booth design at that point, or a booth, and so I packed up and went to Baltimore. I was absolutely blown away. There were 850 artists indoors on the Pratt Street Convention Center in Baltimore. It was the cream of the crop. I walked through there for 4 hours in total awe of the artwork, thinking, is there ever a chance that I could ever do that show? I spent the second half of the day looking at booth designs and what they had created to sell their work in. And I was kind of flabbergasted. In my opinion, I found a lot of them were very insufficient, and they did things wrong. In my opinion, booths, and there would be giant patterns and things on the wall of fabric patterns and things, and they would have their artwork on top of that. And it's like, are you trying to sell the wall, or are you trying to sell the artwork? The focus needs to be on the artwork. So there were booths that literally had a better booth design than their artwork was. So design your booth not to outshine your artwork, but to show off your artwork. Okay. Also, when you're doing this booth design, you have to be aware you're going to do shows that are indoors and you're going to do shows that are outdoors. The indoor shows are going to be totally different. You're given a booth space indoors that you purchase 10 by 10s, you can purchase 10 by 15s, you can purchase 10 by 20s. Sometimes you'll purchase a 10 by 10 and you get there and there's actually a pillar in the back corner of your booth. So whatever you develop as a booth design has to be somewhat malleable, because you show up to and they're not going to, it's like, sorry about your luck. You got a post in your corner of your booth. So you have to be able to manipulate your design around that so that it will fit indoors. Obviously, also, when you're designing your booth design for your tent, keep in mind that the tents are 10 by 10 on the outside. The actual thickness of the metal walls and the things that are that hold your tent up actually require your booth design to be slightly smaller. Don't build your booth design without keeping that in mind. It has to fit inside the tent. Also, keep in mind when you're building it, whatever you're building, you have to be able to get it to the show. So will it fit in your car? Will it fit in your van? You know, keep that in mind. Don't construct something that it takes a semi to get it there. Floor plan, another thing that's real important. Planning out the floors, and we talked about the different size of booths. Keeping the front of your booth open is vital. It's I've had artist friends that complain about not getting people to buy their work and couldn't get them in their booth. Well, went over to look at his booth and he had an 8-foot long table in front of his booth that he was sitting out doing demonstrations. Well, they couldn't get in his booth. There was only a 2-foot opening for them to get in his booth. And just think about it. You're like trapping the people. They don't want to come in and feel part of that because they feel trapped, like they can't get out. So keep the front of your booth open as much as possible, and make it as versatile as you can. Let's see here. I haven't given this booth lecture in quite a while, so you just have to bear with me a little bit. And this is the first one I've done online like this. So, we talked about displays, for instance. Sonotubes are a nice pedestal if you want to get sonotubes. Sonotube is a round cardboard form that they use to pour concrete pillars with. You can buy them at several distributors around town that have concrete supply, but essentially they're a thick cardboard tube. And my very first booth, I used those in my booth. I bought different sizes. I had like 16-inch diameter, 18-inch diameter, and 20-inch diameter. I made lids to put on the top of them, and then I covered all of those with a felt pad. It's actually what's called trunk liner that I bought from an upholstery shop. Wonder who that would have been, since I did upholstery years ago. I was able to buy the wholesale and covered the outside of them with that. And by getting the different sizes, that 16, 18, and 20-inch diameters, they actually stacked inside of one another for travel. So it took up less space. And they really gave a really nice presentation. You also are obviously going to use shelving. You can use shelving. And some of those Pro panels that I was talking about earlier actually come with shelves that you can purchase. Pro panels also produces stands that are pedestals that are different sizes that kind of click together if you want to go that route. I will tell you that the Pro panels, I think the last time I ordered a set, I ended up spending around $3,000 just for the wall system itself. Pricing on tents, the tent like I have, which is a 10 by 10, I actually have an 8-foot tall one. Instead of the standard 7-foot, I like the presentation to have a little more height rather than feeling like I'm a little claustrophobic. But I think my tent was around $1,300 just for the tent. So you're going to have to invest some money if you're going to do this and do it right. But I think the key for me when I started was 110%. And it's part of that. Going at it full tilt is one of the reasons I'm successful. I try to leave no stone unturned, and it seems to have worked for me to do that. By pushing the envelope and pushing myself at the beginning and trying to do a good booth design was why I won 2 awards at the very first show. And I tell that not to brag about it. I'm telling you because I want to see all of you be successful. And that's, in my opinion, that's what you got to do to get there. We talked about keeping the front of the booth entrance open. Lighting is another avenue that a lot of artists don't fool with, don't want to mess with, but I think it's, in my opinion, especially if you're at an indoor show, you're going to have lighting. And I used to talk a lot about different types of lighting, like fluorescent, incandescent, halogen, and all that. There's no need to talk about any of that anymore. The best way to go by far is LED. They use way less electricity. They are long life, and but the thing you want to remember about using LED light is you want to make sure you get the right Kelvin. 3,000 Kelvin is equivalent to the sun, and depending on the artwork that you have, you want to choose your lighting appropriate. My work has a lot of earth tones in it, a lot of it does. So I use 2,700 Kelvin, which has a little more orange glow to the light to enhance the work. If you get 4,000, 5,000 Kelvin, it's going to mute most work. The 4,000, 5,000 Kelvin has a blue cast to it, and it will mute color and change the actual color of your work in your booth. So lighting is one of those things that, like I said, most people don't spend the time on it, but it's, in my opinion, one of the most important things. It not only is the lighting itself important, it sets the stage for your selling, because I'm presenting my work in a gallery type setting. I want it to look as professional as I can, having those lights in there shining on the work. It's just that extra little oomph to help push over the edge, going that extra step that I was talking about. You want to use spots, and mostly spots. If you flood the spotlight, the reason being is that spotlights have a real narrow focus. And if you're 48 inches away from the wall, which is where most 48 to, I think what the measurement is, I've got it written down here. Well, 48 to 50 inches away from the wall is where you want to put the lights. If you put it all the way across the 10-foot space and shine all the way across to the other side, the light's not even going to reach the wall. So make sure you have the placement of your lights in the right location. Yeah, the light works best 36 to 42 inches away from the wall. Okay, flooring is another thing that's a lot of people will get into. For indoor shows, a lot of people will have painted floor cloths. I shy away from that. You'll see a lot of people that'll do floor cloths that have like a patio walkway that they bring you into their booth with, but I think that's a distraction. I think it draws your attention to the floor rather than what you're doing. Another avenue is carpeting. People will bring carpeting and put it down on indoor shows. I personally don't use carpet. If you think about carpet, you're going to have a roll that ends up 16, 18 inches in diameter and 10 feet long, and it's quite heavy. You've got to get that there. My favorite product for flooring I use is anti-fatigue mats. You can buy them at Sam's Club. There are several locations around you can buy them. They're 2 feet by 2 feet. They're 1/2 inch to 5/8 inch thick, and they're actually rubber. And not only is it, especially when you're doing an indoor show, or a lot of my outdoor shows are on asphalt or concrete. So I'm standing on that all day long. So gives me a lot of advantage on my poor feet. And I've literally had clients come in the booth and say, a nice floor to walk on. If I can keep them in the booth 2 seconds longer because they like the floor, that's fine with me. So, and another reason for using that flooring, in my case, being glass, I've literally dropped pieces on the floor and they have not broken because I've taken the time to do 1.5-inch pad down there that's rubber. And since we're talking about floors, I want to talk a little bit about a story. I like telling my stories because they are just they literally tell the story. I was at a show. I was at the American Craft Council show in Atlanta, Georgia. Me and an artist friend of mine, we were walking the show early one morning before the show opened, and we walked by this lady's booth, and she had, for whatever reason, decided to put yellow dots on the floor, and they were about 1.5 inches, 2 inches in diameter, and she had just randomly stuck them on the floor. And we walked by our booth, and we both were like, "Isn't that cool? Isn't that something? Look at the dots on the floor." We walked by our booth, and I said, by that time we had walked past her booth, and I asked my friend, what was she selling? Neither one of us could tell you what she was selling. So the booth, the dots didn't work. It got our attention and pulled us away. I had to go back and look. She was actually selling jewelry. So those are important things to think about. All the little things you do like that work together to make, it's not something that I think you ought to do. Again, don't use pattern in your booth. Electricity, you can get electricity at most of the indoor shows. It's not usually at a huge expense. I don't recommend fooling with generators or any of that. When I'm outside doing shows, I use a battery. And anyone's welcome to call, and I'll go into detail about how I do that, but I use a battery. And now that we have the LED lights, with the setup I have now, I can go do a 3-day show and have lights all 3 days at an outdoor show on one battery. And so it's a system of using this. It's actually a battery designed for golf carts, having the right charger, and doing just a few things right that allows me to do that and pull that off. Next thing, windproofing your booth. You have to keep that in mind. I always go to this story from Kentucky Crafted one year. I was in Louisville, and it's indoors, and people were setting up their booths, and it was early in the morning, and we were actually far away from the back door that opened in the back, but a big gust of wind came in, and this woman had 8 or 9 foot tall walls, and she did not have them secure at all, and they blew over into her neighbor, which was behind her, and took out 3 or 4, several $1,000s worth of sculptures. That was back in 2008 or 9, somewhere along in there. Destroyed this man's sculptures. He was beside himself. I don't know what they resolved, but the moral of the story is make sure whatever you construct, that it's sound. And I do that by using metal angles that tie the walls together. You can do it with zip ties. You can do it with Velcro. There's all sorts of ways to do it. And anyone that has questions about that, call me. I'll be more than glad to go in more detail with it. But it's very important that what you construct stands on its own and doesn't affect somebody else. Especially on outdoor shows, keep in mind you need to have weights. In fact, probably 3/4 of the shows I do now require that you have weights on your tent to hold it down. I've got shows, one of the shows I do in Chicago, they come by and check your booth. If you don't have weights, you either go get them or leave. My booth, what I have are 35-pound metal weights that one goes on each corner. Some of the shows require 40 to 50 pounds per corner. But my weight comes from 2 things. My walls of the tent that I use to hang my artwork on hang from my tent. Is the way I've designed my booth now. So I have a metal tent that weighs about 150 pounds. The walls actually hang from the top of the tent, and then I actually hang the artwork on those walls. And my work actually has weight. So I'm using everything I've got to add weight to keep that tent grounded. So keep those things in mind when you're moving forward. Okay, the use of color in your booth. I'm a firm believer in somewhat of a neutral color scheme for your walls. Again, no pattern. Keep it simple. Use knit fabrics where you can, because knit fabrics, you can wad them up, throw them in a container, pull them out at the next show, and they don't wrinkle. If you use woven materials, a lot of times you're going to have to iron it every show, or you're going to have a display that looks like it been wadded up in the back of your booth. So use the knitted fabrics where possible. I've actually had friends that do walls, and they actually paint the walls at every show. They want white walls, so they literally carry a can of paint and paint their walls at every show. I can't do that. The time involved, waiting for the paint to dry. So I use those pro panels I was telling you about that have basically it's like a thin carpeted pad to hang my work from. Okay, so another thing to think about with color, orange and purple. They're the two most colors that cause controversy. People either like orange or purple. They don't like the other one. Those are two colors to shy away from for background colors. Obviously, pink is gender specific. Think about that. Primary colors, the three primary colors, red, orange, and red, blue, and yellow. Those are basically thought of as kids' colors. If you're selling kids' products, you might want to use some of that, but otherwise keep those away. So a moral of this story is keep your background neutral and light in color. That being said, if your artwork is very light in color and you want to make it stand off, you might want to have black walls. So every rule has exceptions. All right, so I think we're getting close here. I don't want to run too far over and give us time to talk. So I guess that's pretty much all I've got to say at this point. I think that tells my stories pretty much. Is that okay?
Yes, Dan. And if you like, would you like to proceed with the visuals now?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. I'll go ahead and bring up the.
Remember what we're going to do with the first one.
Yep. Gotcha.
So take a look at this first shot. He's going to show you. He's going to put it up. Did all y'all get to see that long enough? For you to take a quick look at that. What did you guys see when you saw that image? Anybody got it? Well, the whole point is what you see is pattern. Can anybody tell me what she was selling? Probably not. She was selling jewelry. But go ahead and put it back up, Mark. So you can see she's selling jewelry, but what you're drawn to, what your eye goes to, is the pattern fabric and all the color. So I think she's doing herself a disservice with her display there. And these are all artists that allowed me to photograph their booth. I didn't tell them what I was using them for. So I hope these are all quite old, so that's a good thing. I don't think a lot of these people remember me or know who I am. So let's go to the next slide. So this was a guy that obviously you can see the left side of his booth is obviously black with the silver on it. I personally think the right side of his booth with the white background makes his work stand off more. These are things to think about, the contrast of the artwork versus the back wall. All right, next. So this guy has built a fort. Can you imagine hauling that to the show and setting all that up? And to be quite honest, I think all the angles of the wood and it's almost too much. it actually detracts from his artwork. I think he could do a better job of displaying it and showing the artwork off versus what he's doing there. But think about, you've got to get whatever you construct. You've got to be able to get it there and set it up and take it down. And believe me, I've done many of these shows. You want to get done and out of there. And the longer it takes you, the more you sweat and suffer. Make it as simple and as lightweight and easy as you can. Okay, the next. So this may look like somewhat decent display booth, but he's got all this work pushed forward and out kind of in your face. And this may look like that would work, but at this particular show, I went by his booth, and he was near the opening or near the entrance of the show, and there were so many people pushing through that people couldn't even stop to look at his work because there's no place for people to stand. So he was creating a large storage space for himself, but I think he was doing himself a disservice in not allowing people a place to get off the beaten path into the space to actually look at what he was selling. It would have been better, in my opinion, if it was reversed instead of pushed out if he had pulled it in. Okay, next. I don't think I have to say anything. What else? It's way too cluttered. It's looks like a maze to me. Next. And he's a friend of mine. I know him really well. He's a nice guy. I see him at a lot of shows.
There's probably a gnome in there somewhere.
This is a sweet little lady. She's from Cincinnati, and just way too much stuff overlapped the table off to the left. You know, with just piles of pieces on top of one another. I don't think she's doing herself any justice. I would not go in there and dig through all of that to look for artwork. Okay, next. Now, to me, this is a clean, simple, straightforward design. Off to the left, you can see you can see all the different colors of all the individual scarves that she has for sale. When you walked in her booth, it's well perceived, well presented. You know what she's selling. You've got room to get off the beaten path. I just think her booth really does. She's done a really good job of selling her work. The only thing I dislike about this particular shot is that this was a very hot day in Cincinnati, and she had lifted her walls up because it was so hot. Her booth actually looks a little better with her walls down, so you don't see what's going on in the background. But she did it because of the heat that day. So if you can imagine her back wall being down, all the artwork just pops off of the white because of all the color. So next. So this is the reason I'm showing this is a friend of mine. That's Mariana McDonald. The reason I'm showing this is that is a purchased wall system that she uses to hang from. It's somewhat ventilated because you can actually see through it a little bit, so the air actually passes through it somewhat. And I think the next shot, if you go to it, shows a close-up of the corner, how it kind of fastens to her tent. You can see how it fastens to her tent there. But I personally, I think a lot of people use these for outdoor shows because of the simple function of it. But it seems like whenever you walk by a booth that has that, the work is always hanging cockeyed. The wind blows it, everything moves all the time. So I personally don't like it, but that's a choice you guys have to make. But the point is, the reason I'm showing it is because these things are available to buy. It just Velcros to the existing tent walls, And most of the tent companies will sell you these. That's part of their sales pitch. They will have those available on their websites. Okay, next. Okay, so this is a stained glass artist, and I think he's done an incredible job of showing off his work. The white background that you see is actually just a thin white plastic that's like literally like a plastic trash bag. It's stretched tight, it's lightweight. The light coming through it shows off the artwork, and if you don't think it's not working, the very left panel where you can see him standing there in the background doesn't have the white behind it. Look at the difference. So that's just the natural light filtering through that white thin plastic, allowing his artwork to really stand off. And so in contrast to this one, I think the next slide shows another glass artist that has very poor, yeah. So this guy doesn't have anything behind his, and it's just kind of a hodgepodge. You see all the stuff going on in the background. Yeah, I think he's doing himself a disservice. Okay, next. So this is an example of what I talked about earlier about a guy having a huge table in front of his booth, blocking off most of his booth. And you get a lot of people that want you to do demonstrations, and my personal opinion is that demonstrations are not a waste, but people will stand and listen to you talk about your process and then walk off. They watch the whole thing and then they become tired and leave. I personally don't like demonstrating. I don't think it makes sales for you, but that's my personal opinion. But blocking off the front of your booth to where people really can't get in is not a good idea. Okay, next. So Tim, you probably remember this one. This was my very first booth at Kentucky Craft Market. It was back in 2006. This is a 10 by 15 booth. Personally think it's very gallery-like. My work ranged from $6,000 or $8,000 down to $300 or $400. And you have to be able to make the customer feel that the work is worth it. And by displaying it properly and doing the few extra things that it takes, should make it much more successful for you. So that's all I have for today.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Now it's your chance to share questions, offer some comments. Anybody want to ask either Tim or Dan a question? As you're doing that, I'm going to go through the chat myself and see if we can bring up any others. If you want to just, I've got you all unmuted. So if you'd like to just shout out a question when you have one.
Dan, on your
Dan,
booth,
Okay, let's see who's talking here.
I was talking about.
Okay, Ms. Ross?
Yeah, I'm Linda.
Linda. Okay.
On your display, Dan, I thought I heard you say that you used some of the pro panels, but did you cover them with carpet and then carpet your pedestals, or because it certainly matches and looks great?
Well, the original booth I actually built from scratch. It was totally custom.
Okay.
So I built the walls, and I did cover it all with trunk liner, which is what's in the back of your car. You can buy that in rolls. It's basically a thin felt pad. It works great. The Pro panels is what I use now, and those are from the company that's called Pro Panel, and you can Google and find those online, and they have all different sizes. And it's a similar type thing. It's actually a very low power carpet type material. So it looks very similar to what you're seeing in the booth shot that I showed you. I couldn't get my booth shot, the current booth shot, into this slide presentation today. So to see what I do today, but it's the Pro panels are much easier to handle. They're much lighter weight. But my original design was based on me wanting to make a statement and get my name out there. So I went a little more overboard than actually what I'm using now. Does that make sense and answer the question?
Look great. And the next thing, the panels where you said that that the paintings kind of wind up looking cockeyed, had Velcro to the booth. How are the paintings actually attached to that? Because it looks like it would tear.
Well, it's like a heavy woven material, and they use drapery hooks to put through the woven material. So it's kind of it's all very loose and kind of hangs free. And of course, when the wind blows, it all moves. But you know, you have to decide what you're after with that. You know, I mean, she sells her work, so it obviously is working for her. But personally, I would rather it be a little more fixed and to where I could have control over the artwork and place it where I wanted it, and it be hung perfect. I'm one of those people that if I walk in a booth and everything's hanging all wappy-jawed, it kind of speaks to, it's just not me. It would be hard for me to buy something when you walk into a booth when everything's hanging sideways.
Thanks, Dan.
It's part of that presentation, I think, for me.
Oh, yes,
Dan,
ma'am,
about
Sarah.
how much do you think?
I have a question.
About how much do you think it would cost?
Who's talking?
Sorry.
I have a question.
You have them raise their hand, and then you tell them to
I
go,
can
Mark.
talk like this.
That's good. Let's go with Sarah W. first. Thanks, y'all.
I have a question for Tim, more of a comment, but when we talk about pricing, if you're in a certain market, my background is real estate, you price accordingly to what the market will bear. You don't overprice a home. I don't think, I go into our some of the exhibits that I've been in, I try to price accordingly to what I know the pricing. There's a ceiling in Danville somewhat, but yet we have people that come in and will have $2,500 or $12,000 on a piece of art. To me, that's a waste of time. It's educational, but I just think that it has to fit the market. I might be wrong, but if I go to Texas, I know my art sells for a different price than what it would in Danville.
I don't disagree with you. I
guess that's gut pricing, which is wrong.
Well, you know, it goes back to one of the decisions is about where do you want to sell your work. Mm-hmm. I'm going to make a statement, and I don't mean it to sound bad, but there are some markets that I just wouldn't sell at. I don't, you know, could I sell the work? Possibly. Would there be somebody that would walk through with enough money to buy one? Maybe. But I'll be honest with you. I want to be next to a Dan Barnes with work. I want to be next to other people because I value my work that much. So if I'm in a small community and I'm selling work, and that's what I'm saying about being in the wrong market. You know,
right?
The market's not going to bear the prices of there. Is it a bad market? No, not at all. It may just not be the right market for the work because of how I feel about it, or where I want to put things, or who I want to be next to. Dan, do you have any feeling about that?
I agree with you. I intentionally, like one of the things that I discovered pretty quickly was that there was only so much work I could sell in Lexington. Right. There's only a certain number of people that are willing to pay what I want for my work. So the answer to that was for me to travel.
That's right.
I've sold work to like the CEO of IBM. Well, she don't come to Lexington. I found her in Bonita Springs, and she bought $2,000-$3,000 wall pieces. So you have to go to the market that works for you, I think.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
There are shows around here that I do to help promote and help other artists and stuff. I do, knowing when I go do the show that I may not sell anything.
Right.
And I will tell you, you know, you're going to go to shows like for me, I did a show in one of my first shows in West Palm Beach, Florida. I had a man walk in my booth and bought everything in the booth.
Right.
It was a chunk of money.
Yep.
But I will also tell you, you're going to go to that same show the next year and you may not sell anything.
Right.
Zero. I've had zeros.
Yep.
I've also had many shows where I do over $20,000.
Right.
So it's a game you just have to play, and you know, and for me, it averages itself out. But if you can't sell your work a whole lot cheaper in one place and a higher price somewhere else, because there's going to be some crossover. You're going to find out that there's people that travel. I've had people from sell a piece to a lady in Bonita Springs, Florida, for instance. She's from Cincinnati. She showed up in Cincinnati and bought another piece. Well, that's two different markets. But you know, she comes in her booth and she's paid $3,000 for a piece in Florida, and I've got it marked $2,000 here. She's going to not be happy. So you have to be consistent with what you're doing.
Sarah, I will say, and I know this from being at a couple of shows, and well, actually some workshops that the Ohio Arts Council did years ago, and there was a gentleman there who did these absolutely beautiful porcelain ceramic pieces, and those were the works that I was most familiar with, and if I was at a show, those were the ones I'd seen. Then he showed slides of all the works that he sells regularly at many, many other venues around the country. And he says, you probably don't associate these with me. You probably don't see them. He says, but they're in many markets where I know that they will sell well. What I used to tell my jewelry students is if you want to participate in a variety of markets, you may have works at various price ranges or something that fits. Now, I'm not saying to design for a market, but I'm saying, if I want to support a local market, I want to be one of the artists, and I'll use Danville as an example, but I know that a lot of the work that I'm creating is not going to sell there, but I may design a line of work that's appropriate to those markets. Maybe it's a more rural market, maybe it's a smaller market, maybe it's a market that doesn't draw the same kind of people that Dan's Miami market does. But I can both support it, I can feel good because I'm recouping some cost, and I'm building that name and that brand. It's still high quality work, but it's designed for a very specific market. Now that's manufacturing to market, which is fine, but a person has to make a decision about the amount of time they spend doing it and what they want to do. It becomes a personal decision then, but I agree with what you're saying, but all markets will not be suitable for everybody's work. It's just what it is.
I'm just sensitive to the markets. And I don't think it's that if somebody walked in and saw my art and it was cheaper than what they were paying, that's not good. I understand that. But I just feel like that it might be a smaller piece. You know, there's something. I was invited to go into a gallery in Lexington. And when they said you have to price per square inch, I just looked at them, and when they came up with the price for one of my pieces that I might sell for $800 or $700 or $500, you know, it was in the thousands because my smaller pieces were going for more. So that kind of blew me out of the water. I just didn't understand that, but too much math. But anyway, I want to thank you for your presentation, both of you.
Well, appreciate it. Thank you.
Catherine White, would you like to ask your question now? Thank you. Thank you for waiting.
Yeah, sure. Before I ask my question, I just, going back to the topic we were just talking about, if you have a website, you have a global market. And I think what was said about integrity is real important there. You know, they shouldn't see one price on my website and another price, you know, in a show in Danville. And so I think just keeping it consistent is probably the most important thing. I mean, if you don't have to sell a piece at every show that we're in. My question was for Dan, how much would you estimate the initial outlay would be for a booth? Is for a painter going as basic as you can?
Well, that all depends on what you do, whether you create the walls yourself or whether you purchase them. I want to say that the pro panels are probably going to be $2,000 to $3,000 just for the pro panels. The tent, my tent was, I think, $1,300 just for the tent. But you know, as with most people, I think start out with less, and they'll buy the easy up, but they end up getting the better tent down the road. If you can bite the bullet, just go ahead and get the good one. If you're serious about this and want to make a success of it, so it can vary. It really can vary. And like my first booth, I built all of it and made it myself, and I was buying a lot of materials wholesale, so it was not near as bad for me because of the situation I was in. I was lucky to be able to buy a lot of materials wholesale. So even the lighting, because my artwork has lighting in it, so I have a wholesale account for lighting. So I was able to buy lighting at the wholesale price. So it will vary. And if you got my number, if you want to call, we can talk more about it in depth.
Thank you. One thing that comes to mind is customer experience. I feel like it's better to go high end. I sold a painting and got it out in a hurry and had to apologize actually for the box that I sent it in. And that just really shouldn't have happened. So I'm giving a lot more thought to even, how I ship things, how they're going to look when people unwrap them, that's an experience and not just a way to plunk my painting and, to their space. And I hadn't thought of that before, obviously. The customer didn't complain or anything, but it was very special to them, and I could have made the experience consistent with how special the painting was for them. And if I was to design a booth, it would probably be better to really think about a person's experience and how I want them to feel when they're there, rather than just, saving money on stuff.
Right. Also, what you just said about shipping, I wanted to throw this out too. For instance, very rarely pay for shipping, and a lot of times don't crate it. I have a shipper that I take my work to, and they contact the client separately, and the shipping is done through them.
Wow.
Granted, I'm working with glass, and my pieces are,
Heavy.
$3,000 for the large pieces that I sell like that. And if somebody's got $3,000 to spend on artwork, they can afford to pay for the shipping. So I don't include that in my price usually. Now, there's been a couple of times where I have negotiated and taken care of the shipping, but for the most part, I'll let that go through the shipper, and they crate it up. They call the customer, and there's reasons for that. If I pack up a piece of artwork and I take it to the shipper and ship it, it's a hassle to collect if it gets broken.
Right.
You can hardly get the money back. If you take it to a shipper like UPS shipper, they are going to pack it to the specific standards that meet the criteria, and they know all the avenues to get the money. I've had 2 or 3 different pieces through the years that have gotten broken, and I have gotten my money back. But the time that I packed it and shipped it, it was a nightmare, and I never did get the money. So something to consider. Now, if your work's not fragile, that may not be as an issue, but still, again, that's putting the shipping on them and not on you. It takes that burden off of you.
Kate Snyder, you had your hand up a minute ago. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, I wanted to ask a little bit more about that integrity of pricing question, and just trying to think it through, because you use sort of the wholesale and retail pricing, and I'm thinking of it in terms of artists. When we show our work, is basically you're saying that like your gallery price should be your price everywhere.
Yes.
That the price that it is on the wall of your gallery is also the price you would be selling it at an art festival or out of your own studio, unless you were doing like a sale, but kind of your standard price would be that gallery price rather than having like a less expensive sort of like community price.
Well, if you're being represented by a gallery is going to set a certain price. In other words, if your painting is $500, the gallery price is $1,000, and you're going to get $500. you understand that there's that doubling of the price there. But yes, if you don't ever, Kate, you don't ever want to undercut a gallery in terms of that. Now, here's something that I read and I talked with someone and I thought it was interesting. And again, it's integrity. Somebody saw someone's work in a gallery. It was $2,500, I think, or something like that for a painting. Person came to the person's studio and he says, you know, I really love this piece. I saw it at such and such gallery. I love your work. He said, I'd like to purchase it. Is there a different price if I'm here? I'd really like to have it. And this person knows well enough not to change that price and everything, but the person wanted to negotiate. This was someone that had a certain amount of money to spend. So because the person was there, because they had driven, they were going to pick it up and take it. They were going to pay cash for it, everything else. It wasn't going to cost them any credit card fees or anything else. They gave them a 10% discount. Now that was less than their gallery. They immediately called the gallery up and said, I just had somebody that saw my painting in your gallery and they came to me and wanted to buy it. I gave them a 10% discount, but I'm going to give you 20% of what I made on it. Now,
Okay.
Does that exhibit integrity to that gallery? The gallery just made 20% and they didn't do anything. They did do something because they had your work there. Did you sell a piece? Yes. Does the gallery still have a piece? Yes, but they also made 20%. So while I would not recommend that you do that, there are ways to do it, and then show the gallery that you still respect who they are and what they do. You know, Dan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that as the galleries that you might show in, but I was always taught that you never really did that with your gallery. You don't change from them. They've got bills to pay. They've got those things. You agreed to put your work there at a certain price. You agreed to what it was, and that's just abiding by a contract.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
The gallery that I talked to, it was in their contract. Whatever price you have here, if we ever see your art priced differently, lower, or you make deals on the side and we hear about it, you're out. So I think there's some teeth if you want to stay in a gallery, and there is integrity. I mean, I think.
Well, I'm going to talk about galleries a little bit. I mean, I don't have a lot of work in galleries. Through the years, I've had a lot of galleries, like in Asheville, want to have my work in their place. The Bender Gallery was one in Asheville. My issue with the galleries is that if they've got a piece on consignment and they've got another piece in their shop that they have purchased, which piece are they going to try to sell?
Purchased.
They're going to try to sell the one that they own. You're secondary. Also, I've had issues with galleries like the gallery we were just talking about in Asheville. I got a phone call from a friend of mine that lives in Asheville and says, do you know the Bender Gallery's closing? They've not contacted me and told me they were closing or moving or anything. I just so happened to be on my way to Atlanta, stopped in and collected all my work. I've had stories where people have never gotten work back. So be careful with galleries. I'm not saying don't do them. Do galleries that are local, that you have some connection with, that you trust. And that's just my 2 cents. I don't do a whole lot of wholesale sales. I mean, I do Kentucky Crafted. I have my work up and it is for sale wholesale. But you can, what I usually do, what I'll get is I'll get a person at Kentucky Crafted come in and want to buy a piece for their friend that's with them. And they're wanting to get the piece for their friend wholesale. That's not a real wholesale deal in my opinion. So to avoid that, I put a minimum on the pieces. They can't just come in and buy one piece, cherry pick the piece off the wall that they want. They may have to buy 5. And so that eliminates that I'm going to call it a game, but the game of them coming in and cherry picking the piece they want for their friend, that eliminates that.
Yeah.
That is sadly, it's a kind of a popular tactic with galleries and jewelers, because I know that my former students who even have been at shows have had galleries come and do exactly what Dan said. I want that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, or I just want that piece. And they would always say, well, it's a minimum of 15 pieces. You can't just have the one piece. So there would be a way to cause them to do that. The commission question that Dan brought up is another thing. That is a separate animal, and there's nothing wrong. Many times when a higher priced piece, I know at Berea College with furniture, in many cases, galleries would want to have things on consignment. We did it sometimes to tell a story, and we wanted to expose people to the mission of Berea College. So we had a dual purpose in it. But Dan is exactly right. If the pieces that they own are the ones that move first because they have no skin in the game, maybe commission, pieces on commission are a way to start, and it might happen with very large pieces, but it's not something I've ever really liked, and I don't do it personally.
So I'm not saying don't do galleries. I think it's important, especially when you first start. I did a lot of local galleries, things like through the Lexington Art League and Lex Arts and places like that in Lexington, and put my work on display at those places. And to be quite honest, there has never been a lot of sales at those kind of venues for me. But it's exposure, and it gets you out there, and that person may buy when they see me at a show next year. Or something like that. But you have to do those things, especially when you first start, for flat out exposure.
I think exactly what Dan said is true. Just look at them as calculated marketing strategies.
Yeah, right. It's part of your advertising.
Exactly. Right. But know what you're doing. Don't expect things that you shouldn't expect. Say, I need the exposure. I don't expect this. I'm willing to spend this much to have this piece here this much time. And those are all good business decisions, and it makes sense.
Yeah, so I'm not saying don't do it. I think it's important for you to do it, especially when you first start. And for me, I have been for many years, I have been doing shows predominantly out of the state and haven't done a lot back in the state of Kentucky. So last year, I started a new little show called the Kentucky Art Market, adjacent to the Woodland Art Fair. And so I wanted to get back into the groove a little bit. So I did an exhibit at Lex Art. I did an exhibit at the library here locally to get my name back out there a little bit again. So those are all strategic things that you do that are in the back of your mind. You're planning for the end result, and it may not come at the first thing you do. It may take a while, but you have to do them because it's just what you have to do. Does that sound right, Tim?
Yeah. Yes. I think those calculated marketing decisions are something you always do, and keeping your face and your name in the public, and that is important. It's part of your brand. It's part of building it, and just use the word integrity with everything you do, and it will continue to build. Think of if you're not in this, if you're in this for the long haul of building a brand as an artist, then everything you do is important every day, and there's nothing too small.
Mimi Becker, did you have a question or comment? Hang on a second. Let me see if I can unmute. I'm not hearing you. It looks like you're unmuted, but
Charles?
Not hearing your audio.
Okay. No, should be. Or can you hear me?
Yep,
Now
you're
I
good
can.
now.
Okay, mine was just a really quick technical question from Dan. That first booth you built, I couldn't tell size-wise. What was the size of that?
It was
it like a 10 by 15?
Correct.
Okay.
And the walls were actually flared out. I used, it was 10 by 10 in the back and 10 by 15 in the front. So I was
Okay.
that you noticed that you caught something there that's very important. Indoors, a lot of times I will do that 10 by 15 booth because it splays that wall out. So when you're walking by,
Right.
you have a little more viewing of that wall rather than that 3 to 7 seconds. So I was trying to grow that distance, that time frame and it's more inviting. The more open that front of your booth is,
Exactly.
it's much more appealing, more open for people to walk in.
And the other quick question, I actually sent it to you privately. I didn't mean that it's that private, but in most shows in Kentucky, things that would be, places that we would hope to go to around here, do they typically expect you to have all of your tenting, or do some of them still require that they give you the framework and you have to work within a framework, or am I making myself clear?
Somewhat. I'll see if I can answer it. Almost all the shows you go to, you're responsible for everything.
So they don't give you a specified thing anymore. Okay.
Right. Very few of them. Now some shows will offer you a purchase of a tent that they will have set up for you, but you pay for that separately.
Right.
But it all depends on the show. Some shows do it, some shows don't. But as a rule, you're responsible. Basically, what you pay for is a 10 by 10 on the ground, or if you're indoors, whatever size you purchase.
Are they pretty good about? I'm sorry. Are they pretty good? I mean, if they're giving you that space for your fee, and so do they ever control and say to you, like you can only use this kind of framework, or you have to use this kind of lighting? Are they very letting you be very free with what you can design for your own boat, for your own space?
Indoors, usually there's not a lot of restriction other than you stay within your space. But outdoors, you are required, most shows will require you to have a white tent. Don't show up with a color.
Okay.
They want it to look consistent and uniform. So even the show I do now, we require that you have just a white tent. You can't set up with a.
Okay.
We were having, there was a show there for years where they would have tarpaulins and blue tents and red tents, and it looked like a flea market. So the promoters, most of the promoters are wanting the show to look consistent and elevate the overall look of the show. So they'll ask for that.
That's kind of what I wanted to know. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're over our time. Thanks everybody for sticking with us and for all your attention and your engaging with Tim and Dan. And I've learned a lot from you and your questions and discussions, and always learn a lot from Tim and Dan as well. So thanks very much for this. And if you have questions or comments about how today's session went, you can contact me at mark.brown. It's mark.brown at ky.gov. Would also invite you to visit our webpage, artscouncil.ky.gov. If you haven't already, sign up for the Arts e-News email newsletter. And you can keep in touch with some other statewide things that way. I want to thank Mimi for setting this up, and I look forward to checking in with you all again in July. We're going to hear from my coworkers, Tom, who you saw earlier, and Dave Blevins, who's the coordinator of the Kentucky Crafted program. So hopefully you'll look forward to meeting them, and I know they will look forward to meeting you. So any other thoughts before we dismiss?
Mark, I'll leave my email address in case anybody wants anything at all or any information. I'd be happy.
Thank you.
Send it to T-Glow Designs. That's TGLO Designs @gmail.com.
Are you going to get a copy of this, or could we get something written to where because I can't write that fast.
Sure.
I could, Mark, go ahead.
Mimi?
Yeah, I was going to say.
I think, Mark, you're planning to send me stuff I can send out, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll send up a follow-up. We had a couple of other questions. I think someone asked Dan for a list of his products. So we heard some of that in the discussion. But if there's anything y'all would like me to share with the group, send it to me and I'll help distribute that. I can make a copy of this recording available too if you'd like to go back to listen to any parts you might have missed or forward to your friends. Then we can do that.
Thank you.
Well,
Bye.
it was nice to meet all of you.
Take care.
Dude, thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
My pleasure. Thanks again, everybody. Great to see you and meet you, and look forward to working with you again.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.